This program is being recorded and will be posted on the 55 Plus YouTube channel at a later time. I'm delighted to welcome Jennifer Droblyen, Community Arts Programmer, for Secrets Revealed. This looks fascinating. Poisonous pigments in history. This should be great. So please take it away, Jennifer.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here once again for Secrets Revealed. It's Monday. I hope everybody has a nice cup of coffee and you want to sit back and relax and enjoy this ride. This is going to be a lot of fun today. We're going to talk about poisonous pigments that artists have used throughout time, and I hope you enjoy it. So we're going to start with one of the basic colors that was used throughout history, really. This is 2,300 years old, lead white. Lead white was essentially first manufactured in Anatolia, which is now Turkey, and it was the earliest synthetic pigment, and it was used in many different types of painting. So when it comes down to this color and why it's so important throughout history, we also have to blame the guy who invented it. So this guy is Pliny the Elder, and he shared his recipe for this type of paint, which was made from lead. And essentially his process, his recipe, was that workers scraped lead acetate off of lead strips and then they boiled it. And after they boiled it, the residue at the bottom of the pot was the lead white pigment that would then be mixed with oil and then packaged up and shipped off. And they started to the containers were sort of like this, but then they kind of evolved into pig bladders and other sorts of containers for the paint. So these lead strips this is a Dutch process. So not only did Pliny the Elder, which was Greek, have this recipe to share, the Dutch also had their own process for lead white, which is a little more detailed and a more disgusting, actually. So strips of lead were placed in a clay pot. A small bit of vinegar was placed at the base of the pot, and then a wood block would suspend the vinegar away from the lead strips. And then they would put them in a storage area, and they would surround the outsides of the clay pots with manure, cow dung, and they would let it sit. So it'd sit in a shed or a storage area for about 30 days, and the fumes would react with the lead to form the lead acetate, which is that white film that you see there. And then some poor guy would have to go in and retrieve it, and they would take it apart, take the powder, they would form it into patties, and then they would sell it. Lead white was very popular. It was used in dishes. It was eventually used in wallpapers. It was very, very cheap and versatile. So it was something that was really beloved. And also for painters, it was it was sort of a buttery, sort of a stretchy surface that sort of sized the panels so that it made them a little more waterproof and airtight, and made the surface a lot smoother to paint on. So a lot of their prime surfaces were of lead white. However, we've come to find that lead white is highly toxic, and it also, unfortunately, after it's produced, it has sort of a sweet odor and a sweet taste. So kids would like to sort of, you've heard them, licking wallpaper and things like that. And that was a very true thing. It tasted like sugar. They actually, it was considered so sweet. It was considered the sugar of lead. So it poisoned a lot of small kids. Kids suffered permanent brain damage, and that was a huge problem back in that time before they realized that lead white paint is super dangerous. So this is a painting of Edward Munch's. It's called The Sick Child. This was actually, I brought this painting on because I wanted to it had nothing to do. This is a painting of his 15-year-old sister who was dying of tuberculosis. Um, and the reason why I wanted to show you this painting, not because she died of lead paint, but because sick children were highly they were subjects of many paintings of that time, and they were sick for many reasons, but some could be because of exposure to this lead. So this is Edward Monk's, and this was again his sister. This is at the end stages of her life. And what I like about this painting is that he refers back to this painting in his personal timeline, and has painted several different varieties of this particular subject. Um, and the fact that I love the composition here. If you know Edward Monk's The Scream, it's very dizzying. It's someone having an high anxiety on a bridge. Their hands are to their face. This one is the face is down, and the girl is looking to the side. She's looking outward towards the window. So it's the subject matter that he sort of he he grew to sort of evolve into this, this idea of madness and high anxiety and sickness. Um, and this was the painting that really started it all for him. And you can see even through the use of colors, the fact that he used this really strong complementary scheme of the red versus the green, and the green being sort of the color of sickness, the color of, kids who have like deep dark phlegm, that color, that really rich mucusy color. He really employed that in a lot of his work when it came down to showing color as mood or as feeling. One of the most famous artists to use lead white was Johannes Vermeer. This is Lady writing a letter with her maid, and you could see these very sharp points of white. So the lead white actually was it wasn't a blue white. It was more of a warm, yellow, reddish kind of white. So it was a warm, warm white, but it was very, very bright. So he can really get in these little details, like in her brooch and in her earrings, and like the tip of the pen, and some of the details that are on the table. I'm going to show you a close up of her. So you can really see the richness. And what I love about Vermeer is his lines are so crisp when he shows contrast from, light and shadow. And just these little details, like right along the hairline and along her neck there. It's just so luminous, and that's really what that color was all about, is showing this beautiful luminosity through the canvas. Another painting that he did that really shows off this lead white was the girl with pearl earring. She's got the highlights of the lead white all throughout this painting, but definitely through the sparkles in her eyes, right at the corner of her lip, and that earring, which was amazing because it was only done with 2 brush strokes. Um, the actual pearl that was used on the model was probably an artificial pearl. It was not couldn't be real because it's just too large to be real. Uh, and he only painted it, like I said, with 2 strokes of paint. You've got the bottom that's reflecting the collar, and then you've got this one brush mark here that shows off that lead white. So you can see that now from a little bit afar, that was only 2 brush strokes. So modern day, science is great because you can see now there's a lot of infrared technology now that is employed with these older paintings to see how the artist painted, and you can actually see the different layers of um, of the different paint, that was laid on top of, and the different varnish that was used. So scientists now can really break down the composition of these paintings. So here you have this infrared photograph, and you can see where this lead white is used actually. So you can see that really bright swatch right there of the earring. You could see in the eyes, and then there's this little highlight that was done in the nose. And we'll look at that again because you can see it was painted over, but this is what I'm talking about. You're able to sort of see the history of the actual painting and its stages. So right there, right there in the center of her nose is that little highlight that's been sort of, another layer has been sort of placed over top of it to dull it down. But it does give a little bit of definition to that nose. I'll show you that again. So you could just see right there in the center, just where that little highlight is that was varnished over. You ever wondered what the back of this painting looks like? Which I always love to see the backs of paintings because it helps you to and actually, art historians, when they look at paintings, when they decide, if it's an authentic piece or not, one of the pieces that they look at, one of the points that they look at is the stretcher bars, and to see whether or not the wood makes sense and if the style of the stretcher makes sense, because each European style stretching and your American style stretching are very different. So this is the back of, this is just for fun. I just wanted to show you the back of this painting because I always like seeing that. But here's another view. This is the back here, and you can see those stretcher bars. And you can also see where there's been flaking when it comes to the deterioration of this painting. So some of the flaking that's been taken off, and then you've got, the restorers, they place, synthetic, or they find some better ways to treat the painting when they restore it. So some of these darker areas are some restorative parts from when they had to remove the paint and then replace it. And there's the two side by side. And here's the two finished pieces side by side. So when the scientists are looking at the paintings, when they go through infrared, they do like to look at the paint layers. So here you have a paint layer that has lead white, vermilion, and red lake. And you can see this all in color. So you've got that parts of vermilion right in the center. You've got a little bit of the red lake particles, and you have the lead white, which is that dense white line right there. So you can see what's great about analyzing paintings in this way is they can determine authenticity based on the age of the pigments that were used. And that's just another way they can identify whether or not it's a true Vermeer. And lead white, because it's so heavy, it's got a heavy atomic, high atomic weight. You could see in the infrared that that these bright white particles are like the dense bits of the lead flakes. Because we talked so much about her, here's her painting in its entirety. Love this painting, by the way. It's one of my favorite. It's at the Hague in the Netherlands. It don't think it ever really travels out of the Hague, except for extremely special conditions, because it's such a valuable painting. It's not very large, but it is exquisite. I think the largest, it's 17 inches, I think, by 15. I think it's 15 by 17 inches. Yeah, it's not that large at all. And Vermeer did not work very large. A lot of his paintings are about that size or smaller. Another artist who used lead white was Whistler. And you could see he also incorporated that lead white in his work. This is one of his self-portraits, and you can see in the collar there of his shirt, there's that bright white. And again, it's that warm, luminous, yellow, reddish white. It's a warm white. And you can also see some of the highlights in his nose and along his ear there. One of his most famous paintings is The White Girl, which caused a big stir in Paris when it was first exhibited, because it was it depicted a girl who was sort of positioned in how elite people were shown in portraiture, where they are, they're these, they're exquisitely dressed, they show the full length of the body. They've got, scenery around them. They're like on a bearskin rug, they're doing different, they're in different, the environment just shows their opulence. And this was considered too modern for the time because she was just a girl. This was his muse, Joanna Hiffern. But she, she's shown very plain dressed. Her hair's a little disheveled, so she just she kind of represented something different, and they thought it was too modern. They rejected it, but he used a lot. He used a lot of the lead white here in this painting. It was also known that Joanna Hiffern. This is this is really sad, but because she had stood so long in the studio, and she she was exposed to that paint, that she did get sick from the fumes and being exposed to the paint. So they think that might have caused possibly have caused part of her death, because she had died early, which I believe of pneumonia, but it was definitely something with the lungs. So it's very dangerous paint. So European painting until today, so lead white was the only white pigment used in European easel painting. And then eventually in the 20th century, so early 1900s, it was switched to titanium dioxide white. It became a healthier alternative because it was non-toxic. You could still find lead white today if you look hard for it. There's a lot of warning labels on them, though. You can find them in the stores with warning labels. The closest alternative is flake white. It's also made with lead, so you have to be careful using it. Winsor & Newton carries it, but it's only can be carried as an oil paint because of the way it's suspended in the oil. But from today's time, you don't really see lead white anymore. Another use for lead white was in cosmetics. So here you have, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. They had this obsession with pale skin, and they used prepared ointments and cosmetics to achieve that. And lead was introduced into the body in 3 different ways. You can inhale it, you can absorb it through the skin, or you can ingest it. So here you have, you've got 3 different shades of white here. You've got the titanium makeup, which is on the left-hand side. You've got bare skin flesh tone, and then you've got lead makeup on the right-hand side. And you can see just how close the lead makeup is to pale white skin versus the titanium makeup, which is a little more cool in tone. So you have, it says here, so, you could see how modern recipes that use the titanium look a lot whiter and far more opaque than the lead makeup. But that didn't stop. I mean, before titanium makeup, we're talking way before, it was in fashion to have pale skin. So a good example of that was Queen Elizabeth I. So she loved wearing white makeup because she had smallpox. She contracted smallpox in her 20s, I believe. And she would cover up her scars with this toxic blend of lead and vinegar. And she used this, and it was something that was, I mean, all her portraits are painted with her with very, very pale white skin. You know, any evidence of it was always with her being very, very pale, very white, and caking on this stuff like very thickly. So the rumor has it that when she died, she had about an inch worth of her on her face of this cosmetic when she died. And again, like through skin absorption, you know, and it's on your face, could, you know, it can knock you out pretty quickly. Uh, Europeans weren't the only ones to use white as a lightener and as a way of, you know, again, and considering that white was so beautiful, they would whiten, geishas would lighten their skin with powders and cream made out of lead. Yeah, one interesting fact I didn't know about geishas is that they would also take and paint their teeth black to make the contrast of the white and the red of the lipstick be more prominent, because they want the teeth to recede and they want the face to go forward. So so they would use powdered oak gall and vinegar. Oak gall is it's a black color, and it's essentially the nuts of the oak tree that are pounded down and mixed with vinegar, and then it was painted on the teeth, which I couldn't imagine tasted very good. But but anyway, this was another use for this lead white. And then I learned, so you see how beautiful that red is. That red also was a color that was in fact a fashion. It was called minium. So red lead is essentially it was derived from a river in Spain. It was discovered by chance when the lead white was cast into a fire, and it produced this very vibrant, thick red. And the red, synthetic lead red was produced in China as early as the Han Dynasty. Also, it was found in some of the mummy portraits from Egypt between the 2nd and 4th centuries. And they're also found in Afghani Buddhist wall paintings. And it became a substitute for cinnabar, which was another color, but it wasn't. It's a color of red, but it was not as bright. It was also used in the Middle Ages for the decoration of manuscripts. And you roast the white lead pigment in the air. It would eventually turn yellow, then to an orange lead. And then the richness of the color was depending on how long the mineral was roasted. The use of red lead was eventually phased out with the introduction of vermilion from the 11th century. And here's what it looks like in its natural form. But red lead, you could see far, far back in history. Here you see it in 16th century paintings, like in Titian's Madonna and Child. You could see the richness of that red shawl and in some of that drapery. That red lead was used. Even in muted tones, it was used along with more yellow to warm up the skin in the baby, and then, you know, used in cooler tones mixed with that lead white to dull it down in the dress. You can also find it in Rubens' Descent from the Cross. This really rich, deep red. Also in 16th century Raphael's The Crucifixion, you could see this red lead was used. Again, there's a lot of safer alternatives nowadays. Once they realized just how toxic this paint was, they evolved from it. They sought out alternatives. So vermilion is now the color that most represents this minium. Now I want to talk about one of my favorite colors. This is Scheele's green. Scheele's green is it's got a very interesting history, so I like to focus on this color a lot. It was invented by Carl Wilhelm Scheele in 1775. He was a Swedish chemist, and he was conducting research on arsenic at the time. He loved this color. He realized it by mistake, and he quickly introduced it to someone who made it mainstream. But then he got nervous about the fact that it did contain arsenic. He thought maybe that would be unsafe, but sort of the momentum took hold because it was such an extraordinary color that it became very popular very, very quickly. It was also very cheap and easy to make, so it just sort of like blew up for almost a century once it was invented. But Carl Scheele was also, this is another aside, but Carl Scheele also invented what the color that's called Turner yellow. Turner was actually a paint company that he had introduced the color to, and they just sort of dismissed him and took the color and called it Turner yellow. So he was a little miffed about that. So when he discovered this color, he also had incentive to call it Scheele's green, because then he can name his own color and no one will take it away from him. So there was incentive to keep the fact that this paint was very toxic, and this was a dye and a paint, to keep it mum that it was so toxic. So this color actually was everywhere. It replaced pigments. It was used for wallpaper and fabrics. And I'll talk about all the uses in a second. But this picture here is Napoleon Bonaparte's bedroom. And you can see the background's got the wallpaper. He's got this drapery here, the fabric that covers his bed frame. You've got these curtains here, all made with that Scheele's green. He was, after the war, he was sort of exiled to this place called St. Helena, which was an island that was very, very humid. So keep that in mind when we talk a little bit more about how arsenic could be like placed and seep, into skin very easily or ingested. This was a watercolor by Franz Joseph Sandman. And this depicts Napoleon in that bright green that was his favorite color, looking pensive on the edge of the island. So he actually chose the colors for his bedroom, and he wanted the green to be everywhere. They had decided that he had died of stomach cancer. But later they analyzed his hair and they realized there was significant amounts of arsenic. You can see that little pattern back there of the wallpaper. There's a small little tile here on the right, which was actual tile from that room, to show you just the intensity of that green. This is also a pretty popular subject to depict him at his end of life stage, where the green, the arsenic, sort of actually turned the skin green. So when he had passed away, he did have that green cast to his skin. So this was painted in 1843. It's currently hanging in Paris. What you have here, these are just some of the examples of the wallpaper that was used. But the arsenic was also, just so you know, it was you know, this color, which was a dye, it was sprayed on vegetables. It was used in postage stamps. So it, you know, people were easily ingesting this this color. Another wallpaper pattern. I mean, there's no denying how beautiful the wallpaper is. These lovely floral patterns. And then the range you can get in color. You can bring it to a warm level, you can make it cool without losing its vibrancy. So some of the artists that used Scheele's green was Turner. So this is one of Turner's pieces. He liked to take his oils with him. At this point, you know, artists would take pig bladders and they would carry their paints in pig bladders, which is gross, but necessary. And eventually, when watercolors fell into favor, it was great because you can take a cake, right? Let things dry, and then you can carry those things with you and make them more portable. And it wasn't until the invention of tubes, which really made the Impressionists, well, the Impressionist, you know, movement was really based off of plein air painting outdoors, and the tube, the invention of the metal aluminum tube, was one of the reasons for the big Impressionist boom. But before then, they used to carry their paints outside in pig bladders, which I'm sure stunk and was gross, but they needed to carry them somehow. So this is one of Turner's paintings. And then in the 1830s, he realized he found this color, this bright green color, and he would sort of incorporate it as accents in his pieces. So here you have, you've got this one painting, and I just covered up it's called Going to School. And it was an illustration that he made for a group of poems. And he had sort of switched from using this color, this really vibrant color that can be dulled down, to like this other color, which was slightly different. It was called emerald green. And here you can see, as that accent, there's another little accent in the woman in the window, but you could see the backpack being this vibrant green, which brings your eye almost directly to the boy when you see it at a distance. So he also used emerald green in this watercolor, and he did use it with other pigments. So the two greens were starting to become suspect as being very toxic. And emerald green was really going into the mainstream because it was such a, it was more of a bright grassy green color. And the Irish folks really took to that color, right? Because it looked just like the color of their landscape. So because these colors were so toxic, and no one really knew this, they would attach them to clothing. They would they were used, they were painted on fabric using sort of a fix. And then when women would dance, or they would, you know, move around, the dust from this arsenic, this color, would sort of flake off and sort of put these fumes in the air. And then also, like, when they you know, the way that wallpaper is applied, because the wallpaper, you know, is a damp process, and then it, you know, then it dries, and then if you're in humid conditions, it warms it back up, and then you have a you know, you've got this tendency to mold and to get, fungus growing. So that was also a main cause of toxicity and concern with all these symptoms and people getting sick. These greens were also used as a food dye. So, like I said, it was considered a paint and a dye. So this was one of the big uh-ohs that they did in 1850s. So because bakers were starting to use this color as food coloring and really, even using it in cocktails and things. And then there was a huge poisoning. There was 21 people who died from arsenic-laced hard candies. It was called the Bradford Sweets poisoning. And I guess there was a popular guy. His name was Humbug Billy. So that was sort of he became sort of the marker for arsenic candies. Children were also exposed heavily to this color. They were put to work. A lot of these kids were put to work making artificial flowers. And because they were dusted with that bright green to make them look a little more real and authentic, the kids were highly exposed to this color as well. A lot got sick as well. So if you ever wondered what the phrases "that's a killer outfit" or "knock 'em dead" came from, it came from the Victorian age with these women wearing these bright colors. So even though they looked, again, it was a color that was highly in fashion because it was a very unique color. It was a very hard color to find, as as a dye or whatever. It needed to have that arsenic in it to make it really vibrant. So it was such a color for the elite that they wanted more and more of it. However, the women would have side effects such as like scabs and ulcers, and they would have real deep sores on their skins. Women would also faint from wearing these big green gowns. So it was really, really big business at that time. So it really was popular till the end of the to just the start of the 1900s, at the end of the 1800s, when they finally started to realize that these green shades, are causing sickness. Here's another couple good examples of the color being used on the walls and in gowns. And then again, in artificial flowers that were used to sort of decorate their hair. And at the height of its popularity, Shields green, there was 7 tons of Shields green that was being shipped out of England in 1860. So that gives you sort of a idea of how crazy popular this color was. And again, is it being used as a dye and a paint? Engravers use them to decorate their illustrations, and here you have a good example of that. Those dresses, by the way, I just want to say one quick thing about Victorian dresses. A lot of and just Victorian dress in general, there was a lot wrong with the wardrobes of that day, because not only the men, they would have these big top hats, and the men who would create these hats, right, the hatters, they would, and there's like the phrase "the Mad Hatter." Well, that's because their hats of that time were made with fur, and the fur was sort of smoothed down with glue and then coated with mercury, dusted with mercury to sort of seal the fur in. And that is what caused like a lot of brain damage to the men. And then in the women, these dresses were like this paper thin fabric, And you could see here, they were extremely flammable. So, if you think about all the oil lamps of that time, they didn't have electricity. So you think of all that fire that was around around these women during that time, for when they cooked, for when they danced, in parties, just, they were really super flammable. So here is a demonstration of a flannel, a sleepwear right here, a flannel dress, and just how flammable that was. I mean, in 60 seconds, the whole dress goes up in flames. And there were actually a great number of deaths, not only by, just the dyes that were used in these beautiful dresses, but the fact that these dresses were so flammable. It's terrifying, but what people would do for fashion, I guess. But back to the paint. So we got Manet, who is one of my favorite painters, because this guy he did not hold back in using black. He used ivory black a lot in his paintings, and that's how you can tell him apart from Monet very easily. So Manet, in his time, this is, remember, this is just right at the time of, just before Impressionism, because it's Monet and Manet assisted at the same time. But Manet was a little bit more of a realist, but he did take a lot of leaps. Here you have him using both the Scheele's green and the emerald green in the height of its popularity. So you've got this background of this forest here, and that bright green is the emerald green, and the range of the greens in the leaves, the top leaves, are the Scheele's green. Let's see a little bit more of a closer bit of that up top here. So you can see he employed both shades. And you can see how you would need both, right? Because that emerald green, you can't really get any other way. And that Scheele's green gives you a beautiful range, because that emerald green is so, it's super, super bright, but you can't really lean it one way or another without really losing that intensity. With Scheele's green, you can sort of go and do the range of warm to cool. So you almost need both on your palette. And Bazille was one of those artists too that, and this shows proof of his use of those two colors on his palette. This is a self-portrait from 1865. Monet eventually used emerald green as well in some of his plein air paintings. And then quickly, because he was the father of the Impressionist movement, you then saw other artists pick up on that emerald green color. So here's Monet's use of emerald green. You've got Paul Gauguin's use of emerald green in that back swath of green there. And even in those faces, look how he employs that green to show shadow. Redon was using emerald green, and this is a pastel. So he used it as a dust form, which probably wasn't healthy. So this was from 1893. Here's a close-up here. So when you go and walk through the museums, really pay attention to finding this color. And, unfortunately, what can they do? Everything's behind glass, so you don't have to worry too much anymore about exposure. But it's pretty much everywhere. It really wasn't completely discontinued until the 1960s. So here you have Van Gogh, his use of emerald green. The fact that that color sort of shows as, you know, not only like bright foliage, but also to depict almost like a green is sort of like it was a moody color, like to show sickness or sadness, or again, like how Munch used, you know, he used his color as, you know, just as a, you know, show of anxiety. One of the big cases in the U.S., because people still wonder, like, um, where is Shields green? Where is emerald green? You know, like the true toxic stuff that still has the arsenic. There was a U.S. Italian ambassador to Italy. Her name was Claire Booth-Luce. She fell sick from arsenic poisoning, and our CIA suspected the Soviets, and they sent a team to Rome to investigate. And they found that the ceiling in her bedroom was decorated with pigments full of arsenic, and a washing machine had been installed in the room above. And what it did was it sort of rattled the ground, which sort of shook the dust down on her as she slept. So she got very sick. And but they find it fascinating that, you know, it wasn't the Soviets at all. It was just this color. So today's emerald green is this bright green. Pantone called it the color of the year. That should be said. And you could still get some pretty good richness of color, pretty good color combinations. You can warm it up, you can cool it down. But this color, pretty much that bright emerald green, is still in use. It's not toxic now. So you can get that color pretty much you can get it as a watercolor, you can get it as a acrylic paint, you can get it as an oil paint, depending on the binder. That goes to say for all of these colors. Again, titanium white is now like the non-toxic version of lead white. People like it because it holds that same sort of opacity, but it's not as it doesn't have that nice rich luminosity butter type texture to like the lead white does. So artists still take a chance, and they can buy it from Winsor & Newton. But for the most part, titanium white is the color of choice now for pretty much, you know, all the professional artists and designers of today. And emerald green, like I said, you know, they've made a lot of leaps since these days, and you know, they found different synthetic versions of these colors that are safer. So I think that's all I have for you guys today. So I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to go into the chat. Have there been any modern?
Jen?
Yes.
Jen, when you're looking at a painting today, how do you tell whether it has Shields green or emerald green?
So it really is, you know, unless it's notated, they won't tell you. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself. You got to kind of look at, you know, who used it and the color of the day, and just how vibrant that color is. Because the more vibrant the color is and the older it is, the more toxic it probably was. So again, a lot of the colors that have, or a lot of these paintings and stuff that have these pigments, they do protect them. They do put them behind glass. But for the most part, you're kind of on your own to discover that for yourself. I mean, I wouldn't recommend, you know, licking a painting or sniffing one. but I would say, it's a good thing to ask, when you're at the museum, and you can say, hey, can you show me a painting that, where the artist used Scheele's green? And I bet you someone would know where to direct you. Let's see here. Have there been any modern forensic studies about artists whose health was affected by these toxic paints? Yeah, I mean, you can just, if you look up these particular names of these paints, there's just so much information now across the board of artists that have used these paintings. I mean, Van Gogh is a good example of that, right? Because they knew he had mental illness. Now there's studies that are saying that it might be some of these pigments that he was using that and he was exposed to. Some artists lick their brushes when they're painting. They're trying to get a nice tip on their brush, so they'll lick the paintbrush, so that can be ingested that way. Who knows how some of these artists have ingested this paint, whether it's through dust exposure or through again ingesting the paint. But there's a lot of information out there now because there was a lot of research done to protect artists now, because back in these days there wasn't any oversight, right? Artists would just make what they came up with, and they would use what history taught them to use, and then they would suffer consequences. So yes, this session's being recorded. It's going to be on the YouTube channel, hopefully. Hi, Rose. How do you tell differences in two greens on a painting? So I think we kind of addressed that, Alice. Thanks. Are the gowns we see at history museums containing? Yes. And if so, what do conservators do when restoring fabric? That's a great question. I think I think it depends on what the situation is. I mean, I think that arsenic, one thing I do know, I know I've been exposed to arsenic. I used to work at the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I was an outreach educator, and I would take animal mounts to schools. And little did I know these mounts were covered in arsenic, and I'm like, you guys, why didn't you ever tell me? They're like, well, it's at this point, these things have just sort of flaked off, and but I'm still consuming them in my car, right? I'm putting them in my car, I'm moving them around, because taxidermists used to use arsenic to treat their sculptures. So yeah, so I think when it comes down to restoring fabric and stuff, I think they do the same sort of examinations. They probably, they do the date checks and see, like, is there potential for arsenic to be in these dyes? And then I think they try to restore it as the best they can. If they have to replace it, I can't imagine that you can get the same sort of color. I'm sure you can, but but then are you really looking at the authentic object anymore? I think that's what conservators really, that's like the talk between conservators, is just how far do you take it and replace it without really replacing the whole object, if that makes any sense. Are there organic colors that artists use that are poisonous? Yes. Well, still, we're going to be doing a little bit more research. Next session is going to be part 2. So I've got another couple colors coming that are going to be really fascinating. There's some purples I want to talk about, and there's a yellow I want to talk about. So there's some coming on their way. So so stay tuned, because there are organic colors that are considered unsafe. When a painting is restored, do they use non-toxic paints? Another good question. I think what, you know, again, conservators are fighting with that argument every day, you know, like how much do they replace with something that is safer, that looks like it hasn't been restored, right? That's the thing, is they want to make it, they want to restore it without making it look restored. Yes, Melanie, the Radium Girls painting watches. Yep, exactly. Yeah, because that is, oh, what is that medium? What was that stuff? Radium. The radium was it was the glow in the dark. It was sort of it glowed in the dark, and that was why watches and clocks would have be painted with the hands of the clocks were painted with that radium, and yeah, it sickened a lot of people too. But again, like radium is, you know, it's a naturally occurring, you know, element. So there's a lot of elements, like I said, that, you know, that are just, you know, they've used as they turn them into paints. And again, it's a dangerous thing being an artist these days. So. All right. I hope I got everybody's questions in without being too vague, but stay tuned for the next episode of Secrets Revealed when we do another batch of poisonous pigments.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This was absolutely wonderful.
You bet. Thanks, Sheila. And thanks everybody for joining me today. And I'll see you next time.